Hey everyone, this is Eddie Kalegi with Tim Moore reminding you that SportsSpeak is now powered by SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the one-stop shop for tickets to sporting events, concerts, and so much more.
Use the promo code SportsSpeak at checkout for $20 off your first purchase.
SeatGeek, let there be live. Now, on to the show. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to episode 186 of SportsSpeak, live powered by SeatGeek. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
One of the most exciting days of the year. The National Football League is back in 2024, and for the fifth year in a row, we're getting you set for the season. It's been a long time coming now. I mean, how long we've been doing this show. I was thinking Joe Burrow had not started play in the NFL when we started. Ben Roethlisberger and Drew Brees were still quarterbacks, as was Tom Brady. We're kind of into that newer era, and this year is going to have some big changes roster-wise. There's not a whole lot of quarterback movement. There's a couple of players in new places, but skill position players all over the place. Running backs and receivers went rampant all over free agency, so we'll be talking about that. We'll also be previewing the Philadelphia Eagles season, obviously. Tim's a Giants fan. I'm an Eagles fan. 2 episodes ago, we previewed the Giants season. We'll do the same for the Eagles before we get into our actual predictions holistically for the season for the NFL. We have our SportsSpeak Fantasy Football League. We did our draft. If you missed it, it was a lot of fun. Our 3rd annual gimmick draft. That's available on YouTube as well. And on Twitter at SportsSpeak Live, we will be continuing our weekly pick-em. Me and Tim have each won the honor twice, so year 5, but now we will add a twist. We're going to be doing spreads, so will teams cover spreads? It's going to create a lot more stress and chaos in that. So stay tuned for that beginning with week 1 Sunday games. We'll be dropping that on Saturday. But let's talk about the Eagles, Tim. I'll flash the graphic up for the viewers at home. We both feel very similar about this Philadelphia Eagles team. Both of us think they're going to go 12-5 this year. I just assume there's going to be a game where they get tripped up by a team that is very bad, because that's what happens every year. I think the lucky team is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers, because their defense is going to neutralize Jalen Hurts, and whoever's starting a quarterback at that point is going to make just enough plays against the Eagles defense. I still have concerns about this Eagles team. Jason Kelce, it's not at center anymore, is going to change the structure of the offensive line. Not a ton, but it will certainly have an impact. I still have my doubts about Saquon Barkley. I've said it several times in this show. Saquon Barkley is a good running back. He's been a great player for only 2 years of his 6-year NFL career, and those are the 2 years he managed to stay healthy. I don't know if he's going to be able to stay healthy. I also just don't think he's that great of a pass catcher compared to DeAndre Swift, so we'll see how that goes. Receiving core, of course, is great with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. The defense, it's still getting old despite Fletcher Cox retiring. You still have Brandon Graham. Devin White's already hurt. Darius Slay had a bad year last year. CJ is back, which I'm kind of excited about to see what he can bring to the table. Obviously, the safety pairing of Cooper DeJean and Reed Blankenship is funny for many reasons, but I think they'll both truthfully be very solid players. But it's just when I compare them, and not to give away my Super Bowl prediction at all, but when I compare them to a team like the 49ers, I just feel like there's more security and confidence that I can have in San Francisco to win a lot of games and go on a deep playoff run than this Eagles roster, which again, Tim, you always talk about complacency. Yeah, they changed running back, but besides that, not a whole lot of moves made by the Eagles this offseason. And this roster that remained largely intact is the same team that had that monumental collapse last December, starting with the loss to the Cowboys, really starting when they allowed Drew Lock to have a 98-yard 2-minute drill on Monday Night Football, and ultimately getting blown out by the Buccaneers in the first round of the playoffs. So I have my concerns, but I think they're going to be very serviceable in the regular season. I still think, because the NFC to me is still much weaker than the AFC, they'll be one of the top teams in the conference. 12-5 is my pick, and as you see, as you saw in the graphic, that's what you thought as well, Tim.
Yeah, I think they're the best team in the NFC East. And Eddie, I don't exactly agree with you though fully that they only really changed the running back room. Because in my opinion, yeah, granted he hurt Devin White, right? That was a huge improvement, getting a guy that's fast and can tackle the middle linebacker spot. And as we know, their secondary was very weak last year, but to go back and get CJ Gardner Johnson, there we go, to go play quarterback, is a very huge thing as well, because of the success we come in Philadelphia. Granted, I find it very funny that after getting his car robbed and everything, and he said Philadelphia was the worst, he came back to play for them, I think is really funny. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions on the front line. Can this team create pressure? I'm very eager to see. Can they stop the run? I'm very eager to see. But overall, how I look at the balance of my schedule, I think, listen, there's going to be some solid teams to lose to. But I think it's going to be just like last year. They're going to start off hot. Everything's going to be great. And then they're going to have that little collapse around the mid-late portions of the season. And they'll kind of find their footing a little bit, unlike last year going into the playoffs. But when I look at the NFC teams, to be honest with you, you mentioned 49ers, right? Security wise. Yeah, there's a lot of security. But outside of that, I don't know. Because when I looked at my analysis of the NFC North, yeah, it looks great. The Packers look good, right? They look promising. But that's only because also their schedule makes them look promising. On the NFC South side, it's either the Bucks or the Falcons for me that are solid. And would you take any of those teams over the Eagles? Maybe the Bucks, maybe, just maybe. But other than that, I don't know. The Falcons' offense, very, very questionable when you think about it. Outside of Drake London, and maybe if Kyle Pitts shows up this year, Kirk Cousins doesn't really have consistent targets. Darnell Mooney had 1,000-yard seasons, 2 years ago? That was it. He had one 1,000-yard season. And the same thing is also to be said about really Drake London and everything else, where, for the record, he hasn't even had a 1,000-yard season yet. But Kirk Cousins is going to be throwing to him. Kyle Pitts has not a 1,000-yard season in a few years now. So I'm very eager to see what the Falcons' offense looks like. But that Bucks team looks to be consistent. And I know, Brandon, I've been very critical of their head coach because I don't think that he was head coaching material. But the Bucks proved last year that they are a solid team, and Baker Mayfield proved he's a solid quarterback. So I'm eager to see the progression they have going into this year in the NFC South. But you have to consider the Eagles being a top 2 or 3 team in the NFC without a doubt. And listen, anything can happen in the playoffs. Just because the 49ers may have the best team, I mean, look how hard it is for them to get to Super Bowl times and win it, right? Even when they do get there, you got to win when it matters. And it matters about your momentum towards the end of the season, which is why I wouldn't fully count out any team that makes the playoffs unless you're a low wild card seeding more often than not.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point to make when it's all considered and said and done. Because the NFL postseason is very unpredictable. Sometimes it goes chalk, but you never know. And again, the NFL and football in general is a game of margins. Obviously, games can be settled by kicks, but it's really one big mistake, one big play that can be the turning point in a single game. And that's what makes the playoffs so unpredictable and why we love this sport so much. So before we get to our predictions, I just want to do some rapid fire here, Tim, and just go through some of the biggest storylines, some quick answers, just rolling through some different things. First topic of discussion, Jets start off against the 49ers on Monday night. Aaron Rodgers makes his return from his Achilles tear. I personally don't see it with the Jets this year. I still think that roster is flawed. I still don't think Robert Saleh is that good of a coach, and I don't see a world where Aaron Rodgers stays healthy for all 17 weeks. What say you?
I have them, if you're asking me if they're going to win, I have them winning just barely. And I personally am bought into the Jets. I do believe they're a quarterback away. I believe their defense is that good. Last year, I picked them to go to the Super Bowl. If you remember, obviously that game nowhere near happening. But I am bought in on the Jets having success this year and being a contender in that AFC East. I expect them to do some magical things. I just don't know if they're good enough to win their division. That's the big thing.
Another team I want to talk about here that could be interesting play this season are the Cincinnati Bengals, because now things have started to settle out. We'll see with Jamar Chase's holdout exactly what
There's
that.
no way he plays week 1, right? You and I both agree. There's no chance.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit worried about that. And for the record, even before Joe Burrow got hurt last year for Cincinnati, you could tell they're a good team, but they're not a Super Bowl contender. They're not at that level what they were a few years ago. And I don't want to play spoiler for what's going to happen when we talk about my predictions of the whole NFL, but I have every team in the AFC North, no surprise, going above 500 this year. And I have them going at 9-8, finishing last, believe it or not, in the division because I have them struggling in division play. So I'm a little bit eager to see what happens with the Bengals, but I don't think they're a bad team. They're just playing the hardest division in the NFL. That's the thing.
Yeah, and the other thing we got to remember too, even when they are at full strength, they usually start the season really poorly, and Joe Burrow is not really good in September. Again, we know about Snow Burrow. He gets much better as the season goes on, so we'll see. And obviously, Burrow trying to stay healthy all year long. Now, let's talk about the Ravens for a second, Tim. They add Derrick Henry to this backfield. It almost feels like he's not really needed because we know what Lamar Jackson can do with his legs, but still it creates an extra dimension to that offense. That being said, they didn't change their roster all that much. And one of your big criticisms you've had over the Ravens over the years is that they remain too complacent. And also, their coach makes some pretty boneheaded decisions sometimes in John Harbaugh. So I don't really know what to expect from the Ravens this year. I think it's going to be very difficult to replicate the success from last season. And even that success was quelled because they ran into a buzzsaw in the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. I think Lamar is going to be an MVP caliber quarterback again. I'm right now, I think Lamar is the second best quarterback in the NFL. I truly think Chiefs Ravens tonight is a matchup between the two best quarterbacks in the National Football League. But I just worry that the Ravens don't have enough this year to be as successful as last season. And at the same time, as you just said, such a tough division. You just said it yourself. You think they're all going to be over 500. I can't argue with that. The Browns have the pieces to be there. Maybe not the quarterback, but the pieces. And the Steelers, I mean, it's Mike Tomlin. You can't expect them to finish below 500. So what do you think about the Ravens this year?
I think the Ravens, because I just mentioned, about the toughness. I feel that the dynamic, granted, I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl this year. This is offensively, you talk about complacency, I agree with you. But when I think about primetime Lamar Jackson and dominance when he got that first MVP run, that backfield with him and Mark Ingram was just so impressive that I'm having fantasies about what him and Derrick Henry can do, being this universal ground and pound dynamic where, Derrick Henry just runs right through people downhill and then Lamar Jackson moves around. Granted, it could take touches away from Mark Ingram or Mark Andrews, excuse me, but I really think that this Ravens team is going to be a very fun team to watch, not from the throwing aspect this year, specifically from running, but overall, I think they'll be solid. I have them winning the AFC North. I still have them winning the AFC North. I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl, though.
Another team that had a disappointing season last year, though they do have the pieces, are the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence got banged up towards the end of the year. They do have Doug Peterson, a Super Bowl winning coach, but they really fell apart at the end of the season in an AFC South where the Colts have a quarterback who, yeah, he's very athletic, but he's played 17 games, period. 17 games since he graduated high school. And the Titans, I think, might be the worst team in the AFC this year. What say you about the Jags?
I have the Jags making the playoffs via the wild card. I have the Texans winning AFC South. So I think the Jaguars learned from disappointment last season and everything that's fallen apart. And I have them doing great division play. In fact, the way I've built the AFC going through my whole schedule, Eddie, I have the AFC like the bar of needing to get to the playoffs, at least in the first seven. You've got to have 10 or more wins. And I have the Jaguars winning 12. But the AFC South schedule is a little bit interesting as well because of how the season played out. So I'm very eager to see what happens in Jacksonville. But overall, other than that, I mean, they even losing Calvin Ridley look like a dynamic team and a dynamic offense that can do a lot of things. And their defense is every year, I'm not saying top tier, but can get the job done. So I view it as a two-horse race in that AFC South. I really do. I'm not hyped on the Colts quite yet.
Now let's talk about the AFC West for a second. Is any team in this division going to be remotely good besides the Chiefs? I'll say I have a surprise team. I really like the Raiders. Despite their quarterback situation, which I mean, you got Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. Now, don't forget, Gardner Minshew was a 4th and 2 completion away from making the playoffs last year with Indianapolis. I
We're
currently
not going to talk about his Eagles run, are we? Then
what's up?
we're not going to talk about his little Eagles run, where he's the reason why you guys fell apart for a hot portion while Jalen Hurts was hurt.
He almost beat the Cowboys at Jerry World. What are you talking about? I mean, he had a bad game against the Saints, but I thought he was pretty serviceable with the Eagles. But I think big picture, the Raiders have one of the most talented defenses in the NFL. Zamir White has been a very hyped up fantasy prospect, and again, he's learned from Josh Jacobs. And when he got that opportunity the last 4 weeks of last season, he made the most of it and is one of the best running backs in the league for the final month of the year. So I think the Raiders, with everything in their arsenal, and again, they do still have Devontae Adams, who's still a top 10 receiver in the game. So the weapons are there. I personally think Vegas could be the surprise team that gets into the playoffs. I personally have them as a wild card. The Chiefs obviously are going to steamroll through this division. The Broncos have no direction at quarterback, and the Chargers have no weapons for Justin Herbert. But I think if there's one team that could make noise besides the Chiefs, Tim, it's got to be the Raiders.
Well, I disagree deeply because I actually have the Raiders as the second worst team in the NFL this season. So, and the quarterback position, the big reason for that. Also, maybe I don't know if it's because he's on my fantasy team, but I have a feeling a lot of the story again this year is going to be Devontae Adams wanting out, wanting going somewhere else, and I feel like they're going to end up losing a primary target. While I agree their defense is very interesting, I mean, of course, when you look at guys like Crosby, I mean, they can do a lot of damage. But on the AFC West side, I only have one team making the playoffs, and I don't think this should be much of a surprise. I have them at the 1 seed. I have the Kansas City Chiefs, 14-3. I think that you can't count out Patrick Mahomes, and you have to give him the respect like Tom Brady at this point every single year. My surprise team, and I don't really think it's much surprise, it's going to be the ground and pound and interesting watch of what the Chargers do this season. I have them going 9-8. I have them missing the playoffs though. In fact, they're the 10th team in with the way. And again, I know my schedule is not exactly accurate because I'm going 1 week at a time, not really going back. But having them at 9-8, being the 10th best record, that means that 8, 9, 10, all 9-8. The Browns went 9-8 for me. The Bengals 9-8. I mean, overall, 9-8 is not bad, but what makes the Chargers struggle, I have them going 5-7 in AFC play. But I think that the Chargers are going to be the most interesting watch in the AFC West. Also, I do want to mention the Broncos. I have them only winning 4 games this year. That's it. It's not that I'm not bought on Bo Nix. I just think that team is a little bit of the status where it's overhyped right now. For what they are, I think they have an awful head coach, and I think that they need to really progress themselves in the future by having a bad season and getting that miserable head coach out of there. Let's just put it like that.
So let's shift to the NFC. A couple quick storylines I want to hit on. Number one, the Dallas Cowboys right here, because I feel like this year, this is the first time in years that people are actually underestimating the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott had a statistically good season last year. CeeDee Lamb now got his contract, and he was maybe the best wide receiver in all of football last year. The running game is going to be a problem. I admit that because you got Zeke and Dalvin Cook, who are both very old, and Zeke is very large, and it's not really going to work. The defense, though, anchored by Micah Parsons, that full 11 is really good, and they always have one guy that kind of comes out of nowhere and stands out and has a great performance. I'm blanking on the name. The guy who set the record for pick sixes in this league. Yes, there's always one guy that just steps up out of nowhere for Dallas and has a great year. And they have Brandon Aubrey, who right now might be the best kicker in the NFL besides Justin Tucker. So I think all the pieces are there. Of course, Mike McCarthy will draw them back. And I'm not saying they are a Super Bowl contender by any means. But these people who are saying that Dallas is not going to make the playoffs for some reason or not even be in the picture at all really makes no sense to me because they are still a really, really lethal team.
Yeah, but I don't know. The schedule tells me very differently based on who they play, when they play. For the record, I have Dallas going above 500. I have them being the first team out of the playoffs, though. I think it's going to be very tight. I think Philadelphia is the team that sets the standard in the NFC East. And I think that when you look at the big picture, listen, I don't think Dallas is a bad team, but when Jerry Jones is in charge of your team, and you can tell that day by day he's losing touch with football. Unfortunately, I just don't see the image. I don't see the understanding. Even with them getting somebody like Dalvin Cook, who was miserable for the Jets last year, and I thought was still a solid running back. That running back position is going to haunt them because getting back Ezekiel Elliott is not going to do wonders for them. So I'm very eager to see what's going to happen moving forward. But I think Dallas's defense will keep them alive. I have them, by the way, if we want to talk about conference standards, I have them 7-5 in the NFC this year, where they're going to struggle with cross conference play in the AFC games. But overall, I mean, still 9-8. I have 9 teams total for the record in the NFC going above 500. So for them to be one of those teams, I think is a very important thing. I view it as complacency and that Mike McCarthy needs to be gone for that group for there to be true change. But Jerry Jones isn't going to do that. So maybe missing the playoffs will do that for the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, we shall see. Still, though, they have not made a conference championship game in almost 30 years. We're getting to the 3-decade mark here with these Dallas Cowboys. Shifting to the NFC North briefly, we know the Packers and Lions are both going to be good this year. And we know the Vikings are probably going to be bad. Now, the one team that I think is the big question mark is the Chicago Bears, who started the year last year as the most awful team in the NFL, then got better and now have the number 1 pick at quarterback and have one of the best receiver rooms in the entire league. I mean, you add Keenan Allen, you have DJ Moore, and you draft Rome Odunze. So that is a great trio at the receiving position. Cole Kmet is a solid tight end as well. The defense has some good names. I don't know how well they're going to perform this year, but I personally think the Bears are going to be a fringe contender for the playoffs, and I think Caleb Williams is going to have a good rookie year. I personally don't have them making the postseason just because the Packers and Lions are in that division, but I think if you're a Chicago Bears fan, you should be very optimistic going into this season. And again, this is a multi-year build starting with your brand new franchise quarterback, and I think good positive steps are going to be taken here in year 1.
Yeah, for the record, I have the Bears going 7-10. I have them getting off to a somewhat slow start, but then picking it up. And I don't think it's going to be the fault of Caleb Williams. I look at that offense; it is an explosive offense. By the way, they also have DeAndre Swift. So, like, think about that too, as well. A solid running back as well that can help that offense. So, I really think that they're going to do wonders. I think they also have one of the better returners as well in the game, or kick returners. That being Velus Jones Jr. I think he is very, very interesting to watch, and he's also taking snaps at running back. So I'm eager to see what they do with him. But really, I mean, their defense is, I would say, also very underrated with the moves they've made and how they've slowly started building. I think that if they get through this development phase quicker than we anticipate, they could be a fringe wild card team. They could be on that. They could be on that bubble. But 7-10 for Caleb Williams' first season, especially if he is not the problem under center, which for the record I don't think he fully will be. I'm very excited to see what the Bears' future holds. But for the moment, I have them ranked 11th of the teams in the NFC.
So let's go to the South quickly. We've talked about the Falcons already on this show. How about the Buccaneers? They won the South last season. They retained a good portion of that roster. Baker Mayfield had his best year as an NFL starting quarterback, but knowing how he's had times where he's relapsed and not been as talented, it's really difficult to expect that it will be replicable for Baker Mayfield. I personally have them going 9-8 and just missing out on the playoffs by tiebreakers. I think they'll still be good, but I don't think it'll be enough to cut it and get in. I have the Falcons as the only NFC South playoff team.
Interesting. I have 2 NFC South playoff teams, and I have them both going 12-5, tied for the division lead, and that's the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Bucks. I have the Panthers only winning 4 games. I have the Saints only winning 4 games. So I think that, and by the way, the Saints have them the second worst team in the NFC. The Panthers are the 4th worst team in the NFC with the way it all works out. But overall, listen, again, I think it's very hard to decide between both these teams, and we talked about it a little while ago. I feel the Falcons have the better quarterback, right? I feel the Falcons have a comparable defense. They have the better secondary, in my opinion, but I feel that linebacker core and pressure creators Tampa Bay has that plus up and on that end. So I think it's very interesting, but division play will at least decide the seeding. But I have them, ironically, not to spoil my playoff look, I have them going against each other, of course, in the third round because I have them at the 3 and 6. And I think that it's going to be division play deciding a lot of the playoff this year, to be honest with you, with how things work out.
And speaking of divisions, let's finish quickly with the NFC West. We both know San Francisco is a juggernaut, but the rest of the division, the Rams, I mean, they're aging, but they showed some positives, and I think it really depends on, again, as the case with most teams, health. Can Cooper Kupp stay healthy? Can Matthew Stafford stay healthy? Can Kyron Williams stay healthy? Because now, for some reason, they have him returning punts, which I think is a terrible idea. And the Rams defense too. Can they stay healthy? The
McVay
Cardinals.
Giants last season with Adoree Jackson. Granted, that completely ruined Adoree for last year, having him go return punts and then he gets hurt. So don't do that with Kyron Williams. It's ridiculous. Just don't.
Yeah, it makes no sense. The Cardinals, you guys all know my opinion on Kyler Murray. I think he's the most overrated player in the NFL. I do not think having Marvin Harrison Jr. will elevate the team's performance that much, while I think he's a very good receiver, and I think Kyler will have a decent year. I still think the Cardinals are very flawed, and I think the Seahawks come back to the pack a little bit. Geno Smith had a drop-off year 1 to year 2. I think there's going to be another drop-off here in year 3. That receiving core with Lockett and Metcalf just gets another year older, and there's really not much else there. So I think this is the 49ers division to win, and I think the Rams, if healthy, are the only team that can give them any sort of a run for their money. I think the Cardinals and Seahawks are both still seriously flawed.
Yeah, I have the Seahawks at also 4-13, right sandwiched in between the Panthers and the Saints. And I have the Cardinals as the worst team in the NFC. I have them going 2-15, which would project them right at that number 3 overall pick. I'm still not bought in even with Kyler. Obviously, the questions of looking at them with Hollywood Brown because he's hurt to start the year also plays a factor as well. But believe it or not, with the way my everything is worked out, because again, I base everything off the strength schedule as well, and I'm sure I'm going to be completely inaccurate more often than not with our predictions. But the 49ers, I have them also going 12-5, and they're the 4th seed in the NFC. Think about that for a second, because I have the Eagles at 12-5. I have the Falcons with how their division mixes out in the strength of schedule. They go 12-5, and my 1 seed right now is the Green Bay Packers at 13-4. So for the 49ers to be the 4th seed, to be honest with you, it's really not that bad when you think about it with how everything will all work out. Because on the wild card side, I have the Rams being the last wild card team in at 10-7. So Dallas and the Giants, who have going 9-8, both miss out. The Commanders go 7-10. I have them in the 10th. But overall, you would have the Packers get the bye. You would have Eagles versus the Rams, Falcons versus the Bucks, and 49ers versus the Lions to open up the playoffs. I think that's going to be something very interesting to watch. And by the way, too, I have the Lions at 13-4, but they lose because of division play to the Packers, who also go 13-4 and get the 1 seed. So I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, so let's get into it here to wrap things up. I'll start off with my full-on playoff predictions right here. Again, we'll have the graphics for you on social media as well. I'll start with the AFC right here. Number 1 seed, Kansas City Chiefs. Can't stop them. Taylor Swift is going to be at all these games, and their division sucks. The Houston Texans, number 2 seed. I'll have more on them in a second. The Ravens win the AFC North. They're my 3 seed. The Dolphins, for me, have the least questions of any team in the AFC East. They win that division as the 4 seed. The Bengals get the 5. They're going to be the best wild card team. As I alluded to, the Raiders, they're going to be the 6 seed. They're my big surprise. And the Bills, despite losing Stephon Diggs and several defensive pieces, and now have DeMar Hamlin as a starter, are going to find a way to get the 7.
I was going to say, on my AFC side, I have the Chiefs as the 1. They're going to beat the Dolphins by the game, who I've winning the AFC East at 2. The Ravens are my 3. The Texans are my 4. The Jets are my first wild card at 5. My 6 is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers, and my 7 is the Jacksonville Jaguars.
All right, so my AFC playoffs look like this. So the Texans are my 2 seed against the Bills, and they are going to win that opening game with CJ Stroud. The Ravens take down the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Bengals pull off the only upset because Miami is still just plain bad in the postseason, and Joe Burrow goes into Miami and steals one against the Dolphins. The Chiefs and Bengals then would face off in the divisional round, and for the first time ever, Patrick Mahomes would beat Joe Burrow. The Chiefs beat the Ravens, and the Chiefs beat the Bengals, rather. And then the Texans and Ravens rematch from last year's playoffs. This time, Houston gets the best of Baltimore. And then, well, I'll just leave it. AFC Championship, we'll get to that in a second. Tim, give me your wild card divisional round for AFC.
Indeed, to start off on the AFC side, I have the Jets versus the Texans. I have the Jets just knocking off the Houston Texans. I think if they would have faced any other team, though, the Texans would have advanced. On the other AFC game, division matchup, we're going to talk about this a lot. The Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Baltimore Ravens. I have the Ravens single-handedly beating Pittsburgh. Then this is going to be the biggest surprise, the biggest upset in all the playoffs. The 7th seed versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins will choke again in the wild card round and end up losing to Jacksonville to set up the divisional round, where, of course, they'll go on to play the Chiefs. On the NFC side, I have the Lions losing to the 49ers yet again. On the in the NFC South battle I mentioned, the 3 and 6, I have the wild card winners of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beating the Falcons in the wild card. And to no surprise, I have the Philadelphia Eagles beating the Rams to open up this wild card round. Now, the divisional round, 4 teams. That's it. Jets beat the Ravens yet again. It's a sensational New York Jets run. The Chiefs beat Jaguars. NFC side, or NFC side, excuse me. I have the Packers beating the Bucks and the Eagles stunning the 49ers to set up conference championship play.
All right, so let me give you my NFC stuff. So I have the Niners as the 1 seed. I think they are going to absolutely cruise through the regular season despite some tough games. Brock Purdy's going to find a way to win them. The Packers I have beating the Lions to win the NFC North, I think by more than a game, maybe 2. I just think Green Bay is really lethal this season. I think the Lions are going to take a little step back from last year. The Eagles win the East, and Kirk Cousins and company in Atlanta win the South. The Detroit Lions do get the number 1 wild card, though. They'll be the 5 seed. The Rams sneak into the playoffs as a 6, and the Cowboys via tiebreaker with the Bucks at 9 and 8. They get the 7 seed. Now, the biggest upset I have is Jordan Love and the Packers are going to waltz into Lambeau very confident after putting up 50 on Dallas last year, and the Cowboys bounce back. The 7th seeded Cowboys with Dak Prescott go into Lambeau and stun Green Bay, just like the Packers did to them last year to knock off the 2 seed. The Eagles, meanwhile, take care of business at the Link against the Rams, and the Falcons at home eliminate Dan Campbell and the Lions. So that sets up the divisional round for me, where the Niners will face the Cowboys, and for the 3rd time in 4 years, Dallas will be eliminated by San Francisco. The Eagles will feel confident. All right, we're playing against a pretty inexperienced playoff team. And unfortunately, this will be where their run comes to an end. The Atlanta Falcons, with Kirk Cousins now playing in the South, having the time of his life, with all of these weapons that they drafted, and finally it comes to fruition. The Atlanta Falcons make it to the NFC Championship, and in a rematch of, I believe, 2014, it'll be Niners-Falcons in my NFC Championship, Texans-Chiefs in my AFC Championship. So, Tim, take us home with your conference championships and Super Bowl, and then I'll do the same.
Well, on the AFC side, I have the Kansas City Chiefs beating the Jets to go back to the Super Bowl yet again. And on the NFC side, I have the Green Bay Packers losing to the Philadelphia Eagles, creating a Super Bowl rematch where it is Eagles versus Chiefs. And do you want me to give my prediction?
Yeah, that's kind of how it works.
Okay, well, I was just asking. I have, and God, it hates me to say this, the Philadelphia Eagles beating the Kansas City Chiefs to win the Super Bowl this year.
Get over it.
Yeah. Get over
Yes.
it.
All right. So you are much higher on the Eagles than I am. So here is where I stand with my picks the Houston Texans and the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs, now, I'm not going to say the Chiefs are a boring pick because I think it's very interesting to see if they can three-peat. But I cannot pick against this Houston Texans roster. They are really talented. CJ Stroud is an elite quarterback, and they just got better. They added a top 10 receiver and a top 10 running back in the league in Joe Mixon and Stephon Diggs.
That's what Tyler Glass said, though. He said he's not an elite quarterback. He said he's not even in the top 10 in the league.
Well, I don't care. Tyler Glass doesn't know ball. I do. CJ Stroud is an elite quarterback, and he's certainly going to prove it this year. He's got Nico Collins and Tank Dell, who have an extra year of experience and will get better and will learn from Stephon Diggs. He also has Dalton Schultz, plus he has Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce. That is one of the best sets of weapons that any team has. And on the defensive side of the ball, we were all admitting it on this show back in December and January. The Houston Texans defense is way, way better than anyone expected. And again, some of those draft picks that were questionable a few years ago are starting to pay off. I think the Texans stun the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. Mahomes is due to lose a playoff game. It's going to happen this year in the AFC Championship. NFC side, I don't have the upset happening, despite the Falcons making a miraculous run to the NFC Championship game. They're going to run into a buzzsaw. They're going to fall short. So Niners, Texans in the Super Bowl. And as much as I want to see Houston win a championship, this is finally the year San Francisco gets it done. They settled the contract issue with Ayuk. They settled the contract issue with Trent Williams. They got everybody back. They have the best running back in football. They have one of the most dynamic players in football in Deebo Samuel as well. And Brock Purdy might be a game manager, but he's going to manage just enough to win the Super Bowl for San Francisco and Kyle Shanahan. So I got the Niners over the Texans to hoist the hardware in February. And that's going to do it for this episode of Sports Speak Live. So enjoy the NFL season. Again, we will have our picks dropping on the socials on Sunday for our weekly pick'em, which will now involve spreads. So it's going to make it interesting. Week 1 of the Sports Speak Fantasy Football League as well. Next week, we're going to be talking fantasy football. We're going to be reacting to Week 1, MLB pennant race. Only a few weeks left in the regular season. So we'll be back next week to talk about all that. But until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off of Sports Speak Live, powered by SeatGeek. Enjoy Week 1 of the NFL season.